Welcome back. You're watching The Explainer, and it's time to have that conversation about the 2023 examination season that officially commences at the end of this week for the various learners to start writing their final exams. And joining us in studio have Dr. Evelyn Jepkemei. Good evening.
Good evening to you, Sam.
Yeah, she is a policy expert, education policy expert, and we have Kennedy Echesa, who is an advocate but also an education analyst. Good evening.
Good evening to you, Sam.
Right, we had invited the chairperson of the National Assembly Education Committee, Julius Meli, had confirmed to appear, but now sends us his apologies that he's not able to join due to unforeseeable circumstances. But all the same, the show continues, and we want to begin by looking at our initial story. Our top story tonight is about that situation in Baringo County, where we understand that armed bandits attacked a GSU camp and at the same time interfered with learning that was going on at Kapindesum Primary School for learners that are also preparing for an examination. The rehearsals should be this Friday. Unfortunately, you can see the images of what they are having to go through 6 days to the start of the KCPE, when they should be writing the mathematics paper, English language, as well as composition in the afternoon. And Dr. so witnessing these images, I mean, it can't happen at a worse time for these learners who, even during the action that was taken by the government, I think at some time last year in September, I mean, we've witnessed a lot of that, but also trying to rescue, especially the primary schools and other institutions, including hospitals. Then you see this for learners that are supposed to be writing exams. What should we be thinking about?
Resilience in education. I think Baringo and that valley in general is an area of insecurity, and I think when we think about the education system, there are certain things that we may not be able to prevent, and even if we were, it would take time for security, for example, to be implemented in that region. So the first thing that I'm thinking is, how do we ensure that our education sector or our education system is cushioned or is scaffolded against disasters that happen? Today it is a conflict, another time it is floods, some other time it is drought, and families are going hungry. So I think we need to begin to think about how do we handle education in emergencies, because that situation is an emergency. And so do we have contingencies, for example, to be able to immediately support those children psychologically, take them to a safe ground, and even allow some flexibility in terms of sitting exams for a time until, until they recover. But I'm sure they'll be sitting their examinations next week. I don't think that in our current system we do have that kind of flexibility, and that's why we are here to dialogue about these things and say, how do we improve the situation?
Right. And Kennedy, the unfortunate thing is that, I mean, this has an impact, especially in the minds of the young children, because some of them are 13, others 14, maybe they're oldest is about 15, but clearly they are children. But they will be graded the same as those that are studying from somewhere else, including Nairobi. What does this say about our education system, but also when it comes to the question of, is it equity or is it equitability? I don't know.
Thank you, Sam. It is a very sad story, and my sympathies are with the children and their families. This calls for this nation to look at the right of education, or right to education, beyond the face value. When the Constitution says that every child has a right to free and compulsory basic education, it encompasses three things: 1, affordability; 2, accessibility; and 3, quality education. The security situation in Baringo is not a new situation. Baringo has always had insecurity from time immemorial. Government ought to have known that it is foreseeable that the bandits may attack children or people and harm children at any given time. What security measures has government taken over time to prevent such occurrences? And unfortunately, the way we treat children in Nakuru or Nairobi is the same way we treat children in Baringo or Turkana, without knowing that these regions have their own unique challenges. The issue of access in Baringo, for example, children have to walk kilometers to access the nearest primary school. In Nairobi and in Nakuru and Kakamega, you can actually be a neighbor to the school and you walk for a very short distance. So that long distance also exposes these children to the insecurities in Baringo. So the government is doing the bare minimum in terms of providing free, compulsory, basic education. And this is why we are exposing our children in Baringo and other regions to insecurities. This is not about equality. The government approach is that of blanket equality. Let everyone access this free and compulsory basic education. What we need is equity, to treat children according to their respective challenges and unique circumstances under which they are getting this education and under which they will be examined. It will be very unfair. Some of these children may never recover completely unless they get psychological support to come out of the experience that they have had. But government is not concerned about that. It is sad, that this is happening, bandits scaring our children at a time the nation is contemplating sending police to Haiti to go and save the people of Haiti when it cannot save its own children in Baringo. It's like a father struggling to feed a neighbor's son when his own sons are starving to death.
And Dr. So you said that our system does not allow for special exams for children or for students or candidates that are in such a situation. Yeah. But what injustice do they then suffer in the long run, especially people that come from difficult areas, yet, like he says, have to be treated in a global manner?
Yeah. You know, I think it's important to realize that Kenya is a very big country, and the circumstances within different pockets of the country differ from one county to another. We have what we call the ASAL counties, the arid and the semi-arid lands. And in those ASAL counties, we have always called them the marginalized communities, right? And these are the least developed regions. And I think it is time then for us to think as a country and ensure that political marginalization, economic marginalization of these regions stop. Because if it doesn't, we will continue to talk about free and equitable education. But really, if action is not taken, because these are things that require action. So for example, if we, in those regions where there is conflict, and as the chair said, children are walking for very long distances. So even when there is no conflict, there is always a chance that these children may fall into some kind of danger, some kind of abuse, and so on. And this is not just in Baringo. The whole of that valley, all the way to West Pokot, parts of Turkana, parts of northeastern counties, and in 2023. In an economy like Kenya, we really should not be talking about, the kind of things that we're seeing. Children being exposed to very traumatic situations. And these traumatic situations become even more urgent when it is an attack. But in reality, from my point of view as an educator, I'm looking at it from anything that affects the wellness of the child. And therefore, if that child is not able to go to school and enjoy their life, it's very difficult for that child to come and sit down and pay attention and even learn. In fact, psychologically, that child is not prepared to learn. unless we then make sure, and that is why I keep talking about resilience, because when that means that we would then put in place measures when something like this happens. We already have counselors that are released to go and support those children immediately, but we don't have enough of that. Okay. We don't have enough of those.
All right, and let's get into the depth of the season, because 3.6 million candidates are expected to start writing the examinations. Of course, that's the global figure for the Kenya Primary School Education Assessment, KPSEA, for grade 6 learners, as well as for KCPE, that is the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education. This is the very last one as the phase out of the 844 system continues. We know that KCPE, there will be 1.4 million candidates sitting that exam. For KPSEA, it's 1.28 million, and for KCSE, we are talking about some 903,000 candidates that should be writing those examinations. And Kennedy, just a few weeks ago, the National Assembly Committee on Education that Honorable Julius Meli chairs came up with a report and said that there were actually reports of irregularities in the examination. Well, not as widespread as had been thought on social media, but saying that there were those irregularities. Do you think, based on the recommendations that the committee was giving, including devising technology to be in a position to control and manage the examination process, do you think we're at a good place to avoid a repeat of those incidences that were in the, especially KCSE 2022?
If the recommendations by the National Assembly Committee are to be implemented, they will reduce cases of cheating. But I'm afraid that the recommendations are not exhaustive, and they do not speak to the core reasons why candidates cheat or why there is cheating in exam. Sam, I've been hosted by Trevor quite a number of times. Sam, cheating has transformed over time. In the 90s, cheating was in form of buying grades at NEC. You take money to NEC, you negotiate for the grades they can give you, and you go home with grades as a principal. Then it transformed to NEC selling exam to specific schools. Then it transformed into teachers getting exams from people who set. Then it went into principals buying exams for their students. Then what we were witnessing last year is students contributing money and colluding with supervisors and principals to have people sit exams for learners. We had situations where strangers actually sit exams and they pass answers to learners who copy to their marking schemes. Who are the critical players in exam cheating? One is the Ministry of Education itself, the cartels at the ministry. Because you remember last year, the ministry was categorical that there was no cheating. Meli's committee is an indictment of the ministry by telling them there was cheating. Why is the ministry afraid to punish people who engage in teaching? Number two is the NEC itself. Exams have begun. Some papers will be done next week. But 2 days, you will see exam papers flying all over social media. And they will be the correct papers. So who leaks these papers? Yet they are with NEC. Number three are the principals as center managers. There is no cheating sum that can go on in a school without the involvement of a principal. Some principals are very strict. They don't allow. Others are actually the people who facilitate cheating. Number four, they are the teachers. We have now removed primary school teachers from supervision so that we keep secondary school teachers busy invigilating. This will help facilitate cheating, if any cheating is going to be there. Because one, you are forcing these teachers. They are not interested. You are telling them you'll be in these schools by force. These are the teachers who have the content of what will be said. We were better off with primary school teachers because they don't have the content that is being tested in secondary school. So you are giving the experts to go and invigilate, and they don't want. They will collude those learners, and cheating will be of higher magnitude. Why are you reshuffling teachers and leaving the center managers? If I were a one-man commission, the first person to reshuffle will be the principals. If you're a principal of school A, go and be the center manager of school B. What interest will you have in helping school B cheat? And why is our education promotional system celebrating mediocrity, so that when principals cheat in exams and their schools get 10 point something, we celebrate them all over, we give them promotions, they become chief principals, and that hard-working principal in the village, who out of hard work gets 4.6, we send parents to carry leaves and say, this one must go. And when the principal said, but everyone else cheated, parents asked, where were you when people were cheating? You would have cheated. And very good and genuine principals are tempted to engage into this vice.
But Kennedy, are you saying that schools, because there are several schools that really performed well, they had several A's in the KCSE of 2022, are you saying that they cheated?
What I'm saying is that not all those schools were genuinely performing very well. And I'll give you an example. Because school A and B are not here, I will not mention them. But if you allowed me next time, I'll ask them to be here and mention. We have 2 schools that I know whose mocks that were done in September in English paper 1 and 2 was a reflection of the KCSE 2022 English paper 1 and 2, including the names of characters. You can never be that prophetic that you are saying this story will come, these names will be used, and the same comes to in KCSE. Can we ask ourselves, why are we rushing to buy specific mocks from specific schools? Because over time, it has been known that what comes as mocks for those schools is what is in KCSE. And that is the reason we cannot defeat cheating, because specific schools have been associated with exam cheating, and they are protected, right from Jogo to NEC to the political class. And the fear of cancelling the results is the fear of the political backlash. Why would Meli and his committee say there were instances of cheating? And the power on the ground, name of the Minister of Education saying there was no cheating. Who is cheating who? Is it Parliament or the Ministry?
Okay. All right, Daktari. So, of course, the report by the Meli committee talks about some of the ways that cheating was happening, and they highlight early exposure is one of the biggest challenges, especially for papers that were done in the afternoon session, and saying that there are teachers that are within the compound, so of course the center manager brings the papers for that day. The afternoon papers are available, they are opened, and nobody cares to check if they are sealed or not at the time they are starting to be sat by the students. How do we address this? And do you think those past, that was in January when the results were released, in those close to 10 months, do you think anything has been done to ensure KCSE 2023 does not have the same challenges?
That's such a compound question. First of all, I'd like to look at this whole question of cheating from a systems point of view. And not center managers or principals or whoever. I'd like to look at it from a systems level. What is it that has made cheating so attractive to us in the country? And I can point out a few points. Number one is that the high-stakes examinations is such that everybody is struggling to be able to get into that narrow gate of higher education, or that transition to the next level. And so the competition then becomes cutthroat. So by and large, we become a country that teaches kids for exams and not for knowledge. And I think I've said here a while back that it would be very good if we ask ourselves, why do we educate? Do we educate for exams? Do we educate for work necessarily, or do we educate for life? So if we are able to define that, then we can work backwards from that philosophy that we would have defined and say, okay, so if we are educating for life, what are some of the things that we need to put in place? An examination system that renders itself to malpractice over and over and over again means that we have some level of rigidity within the system that doesn't allow us to change even how the examinations are set. If we know, and I think my brother here has said that there are schools that are known to perpetually have leakages, perhaps because some of their teachers are the ones who are part of the panels that set examinations. How about if we change the manner in which we examine. You know, if you ask teachers, for example, how do you assess learning? How do you ensure that learning has taken place? It doesn't have to follow the format that has always been followed. We can change a few things to make sure that that even those who predict, in quotes, get surprised when they get to the examination room, because we're still testing the same skills that we wanted to test, but we're using a slightly different mode of assessment. Mm-hmm. The other thing is this, that so I mentioned the question of competition among parents, among the children, but also the fact that when schools do well, the principals and the teachers of those subjects are always, you know, given incentives. How about this teacher who is really struggling and is not, and his class is not able to get that mean score? Does it mean that he is putting in less effort? Perhaps not. If you go to a small school in the rural village and you take a student who has just come out of college, and you take them to teach there, you take one to Alliance, there's going to be a difference in the results. Does it mean one teacher is better than the other? So the next question is resources. One of the reasons why there is this such motivation to cheat is because schools do not have sufficient or at least some level of equity in terms of resources. Mm-hmm. Some schools have libraries, others don't. Usawa Agenda came up with a report, and they were assessing actually some of the resources that are available in schools. And I think they said 80% of national schools had libraries. And I think 2% of other schools had libraries. Now, if you look at a situation like that, how does a child who is in a county school compete with one who is in Alliance? So it brings us back to the question of how are we implementing the question of equity in education? And really, that becomes the beginning and the end of the discussion. How do we ensure equity? And my thinking is that we would need to think about either make the examinations flexible to be able to address the needs of learners who are in marginalized areas, or make sure that we resource those schools so that kids are at the same level, and therefore we can
flexible, you're saying not the same standard as... We
can maintain the same standard, but we can set exams that are... See, for example, in 2008, I was working at KIE at that time, and we said that one of the issues that was coming up is so many schools in rural areas do not have laboratories. And so how do we ensure that these kids, when they go to the lab for the first time doing exams, are able to, are not shocked, you know, because they are seeing the lab for the first time. Okay. And so we came up with a general science curriculum. Why can't we do something like that? At the end of the day, the same skills are passed across, but one does not require the kids to sit in the laboratory. And so by doing that, you make sure that you are providing a platform where children in disadvantaged areas are also able to excel.
Okay. Kennedy, so the report also talks about the cheating witnessed at the examination centers, I mean at the examination marking centers, that examiners would spot and see there's a pattern in a certain school. They're choosing the same section, the same question, sometimes giving the same or similar answers, in fact, the same spelling mistakes in an answer, but the examiners are reporting to the chief examiners or the assistant chief examiners, and they're told, no, you cannot do that. You have to keep quiet about that. Don't bring trouble, because they're under pressure. There's something that they need to deliver within a very short time. What do we do to that, especially knowing that the examiners are the teachers?
One is that tells you that cheating is deeply entrenched into our Kenyan education system. Mm-hmm. The cartels start this at the center level when students are sitting the KCSE. And they follow and supervise their errors right at the marking centers, so that when something is raised, the same cartels have arrested chief examiners and assistant chief examiners not to raise any issue, and they even go through the reports that are given. But most importantly, our teachers just go to mark as a routine. They are no longer interested in marking, no longer interested in vigilation, but because they want to get an extra coin in hard economic times, they go. Why? They are poorly remunerated. They are poorly paid. They are still being paid 65 shillings per paper, as low as 48 shillings per paper. What will motivate them to go an extra mile to mark and report these anomalies? Since they are poorly paid, they have no business at the center than marking and giving the scripts to the next person. And then the reporting system and the procedures are complicated. If you get an irregularity, you have to make a report. This report has to be taken to the chief examiner. Chief examiner has to do what? It has to bring problems at the center and say this was, it takes your time. The procedure is so complicated that teachers no longer see the need of engaging in it. And they finish marking on around 24th of December. If you report an irregularity, you may just have 2-3 extra days in Nairobi and miss Christmas. So what will you choose? To go home for Christmas or concentrate on 30-20 students who are cheating in a center? Because they are poorly remunerated, they have no interest in safeguarding the integrity of the exam. Look at the center managers. What are they paid for being center managers? 500 shillings in a day as principals, center managers. Deputies, they are not paid anything as deputy center managers. In vigilation, what are they paid? They are paid 400 shillings. What about supervisors? About 600 shillings. So you suffer in the heavy rains for 3 weeks to be paid 6,000 and think that you will sustain the integrity of an exam. That cannot happen. And again, you are paid after 1 year. These 400 shillings, you will not be paid immediately. You are paid after 1 year. So if you took some fuel on loan from a petrol station when the liter of fuel was about 210, after 1 year, it will be 410. Inflation has already consumed what you are paid. So let NEC pay teachers well, because a well-paid invigilator, a well-paid supervisor, a well-paid examiner, good money, good timing, will be a more useful examiner or invigilator in maintaining the integrity of the system.
But Daktari, can you trade values for money?
You know, that's actually the question I'm asking myself, because in the report, they did mention that the examination workers, both the managers and the invigilators, are fatigued because they work for long hours, including the markers. So I think that counts for something, and also the poor compensation. There's been there's been complaints for such a long time about the examination workers, all these people not being paid on time. However, you know, I do believe that these are symptoms of a deeper problem of teachers not being motivated. It's not about the 500 shillings, I don't think. It could be, and it contributes, but I think there is a far deeper problem that we have, that teachers are not motivated, okay? And I think this is a system problem, because in the last 10 or so years, we have had a lot of anti-intellectual talk among the political class. People have talked about, oh, you know, university degrees are useless, or, you know, this and that. And what does that do to the people who are responsible for educating the country, who are responsible for educating children in the country? And so I'd like to say that, you know, I'm not very conversant with the nitty-gritties of what happens in the centers, but looking at it from a system point of view, I think that teachers are not just demotivated in terms of the work they do in exams, but they are demotivated across the board. And so it's important that we take that into consideration. You know, like, have we done studies to understand why teachers are feeling demotivated? What is the impact of, say, COVID, for example, on the well-being of teachers? We've had a lot of stories of teachers being alcoholic. You know, the teachers are struggling, like everybody else, with mental health. And then on top of that, you have this kind of a responsibility that is put on your head. I think that while it is true you cannot trade values for money, and I hope we never have to do that, I think it's also important to understand the motivation levels of the workers that we are engaging. Because if they feel they are persecuted by the system, whether it is the employer or whether it is the parents or everybody across the board, then it becomes difficult for them to serve the society as we would expect them to. So, yeah, that's what I'm thinking around that.
Right. I wanted to add something, Sam.
Yes.
Why do children cheat? Why do candidates cheat? Is a symptom that they were ill-prepared for an exam. A student who was well-prepared will not engage themselves in cheating. And where does this come from? Funding of basic education comes in handy. We're looking at a system where a child has not been in school, where a child has not been in laboratories because the ministry has not remitted funds. And you're expecting this child not to cheat in chemistry or biology when he knows nothing that goes on in laboratory. Not because it was a school mistake, is because their tuition account throughout had nil balance because the ministry had not remitted money. And that's why I told you that this year it will be worse, because this year funding has been at its worst level ever. Out of the 22,000 that government funds secondary schools, the Ministry of Education was able to only fund about 11,000 shillings. Out of the 11,000, they retained about 6,000 that went to textbooks, that went to science and mathematics education, that went to activity. So schools remained with about 8,000. Out of the 8,000, it is mandatory that 5,000 must be deposited in the infrastructure account for only approved projects by the ministry. So principals have only 3,000 to run their tuition programs. This money has not been sustainable throughout this year, meaning our candidates this year have been ill-prepared, especially for science subjects. We shall be asking ourselves, why did chemistry perform poorly? Why did biology perform poorly? These are fellas who never went to the laboratory, fellas who are never exposed to the practicals. What do you expect from them? Even as we speak today, the ministry has not given money for the purchase of chemicals that are supposed to be used for the practicals. They are expecting the principals to take these chemicals on credit, only making the running of schools more problematic. Where does this money go to?
So when you say, especially chemicals that are necessary for administration of the examination, is there a specific vote that comes to that, or it's up to the principal?
It is a specific vote called tuition account. Tuition account are the monies meant to facilitate the academic programs of a school. Tuition accounts across the country in all schools have zero balance. So these zero balances are supposed to help procure these chemicals. Schools today received confidential reports about the requirements, what is required for the chemistry, biology, physics, practicals. So what the directors of education are telling teachers is that engage your suppliers and pick these chemicals on credit. Government will pay next year when funds are released. A government that has only released 53% of 2023 capitation is expected to pay accreditors for next year. That is not possible. We are risking the lives of our children.
What happens to the school fees paid by the parents?
The school fees paid by the parents is for boarding, feeding of the children. And remember that free secondary education is actually free because government pays for tuition and parents pay for lunch. So the fees that is paid by parents is for lunch. And for your information, the fee payment among the parents is at 30% because of the harsh prevailing economic conditions in the country.
All right. Sounds quite a lot of challenges that are going on in the education sector. Yet, Dr. I remember when we spoke about the KCSE of 2022, we were here in the same studio and we were talking about the performance that you have 80% of the class not qualifying to join university directly, meaning they have scored something less than C+. And in fact, close to 50%, actually more than 50% scored a D+ and below, meaning they have to start from a disadvantage if they ever want to get to the highest level of education in this country. What are we doing, really?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have to keep on talking about these things, because I remember I said that if an education system is churning out kids who are not going to proceed, who are not going to move to the next level, whether it is transitioning to employment or whether it is transitioning to higher education, I think we have a challenge, because essentially the few are the ones who should be D and below. Those should be the few, but those were the majority for last year. And that is why I keep talking about the entire system. It's not one examination. It's just how the system is configured. And the Presidential Working Party gave some recommendations, some proposals about how to ensure that the system is responsive to the needs. So if this system that we have, the 844 that is outgoing now, was put in place 30 what years ago?
1984, 39?
Yeah, 39 years ago. Can you imagine? And we haven't changed anything. 39 years ago is such a long time. Looking at the dynamics that have happened, we ought to have really overhauled this system in a way that, even the examination system would have completely changed, so that every child has the opportunity to become better. So apart from that, giving every child an opportunity, there is something that we like to talk about as Kenyans, that, when after you have finished school and you go to university, you will get jobs, and we kind of blame the education system and say this education system is not preparing learners for the world of work. But basic education is not supposed to prepare children for the world of work. It's supposed to prepare them to learn how to learn. And so, so when these kids drop out or fail in large numbers like we see, what does it tell us about whether we have succeeded as a system or not? And so I feel that Kenya needs to be quick in responding to areas of the system that are not working. We need to do research. We need to understand what are other countries doing. Use technology, for example, to make sure that, even those kids who are not able to access a lab can do simulations. It's still part of learning.
Okay. All right, and of course, the Kenya National Examinations Council has indicated some of the measures they are taking in limiting the number of people that are in a school compound or an examination center, and the deputy principal will be allowed, but their role is to maintain discipline. Supervisors are allowed, invigilators are allowed, the center managers obviously, laboratory technician and science teacher only during practicals, and authorized support staff to prepare meals for candidates and supervision personnel. Those are the only people that are allowed there, and security officers are required to make sure that that is adhered to. But something has been happening, and that is the transition to the competency-based curriculum. Again, the second class will be sitting KPSEA starting Monday, and we know that the first cohort of that class is going to grade 8 In another year, they'll be in grade 9 and they'll be assessed. I want us to take a look at some of the proposals by the Presidential Working Party on how that assessment will be happening. For grade 6, they will require a cumulative score for what they may have, how they may have performed between grade 4 and 6. There will be school-based assessments, and the essence of all those is to monitor learners' progress and to give feedback to the stakeholders. After that, the second level of assessment will be at the grade 9, which is at the end of the junior school. If that name is adopted. At the moment, it's junior secondary. So the assessment at that level will be that 20% will come from the Kenya Primary School Education Assessment. So whatever the candidates in grade 6 will be sitting next week will contribute 20% of what that will be at the end of grade 9. Then 20% will be based on school-based assessment for grade 7 and 8. So the candidates who are in grade 7 now, however they perform, how they perform this year and next year will count for 20%, and then there will be a summative evaluation at the end of grade 9 for them to transition to senior school, or senior secondary if you like, which I want us to look at. At that level, 70% of assessment will be summative, meaning an examination. 30% will be school-based assessment. There will also be community service learning and values and competencies they'll have accumulated by that time. So, Daktari, again, for the challenges we've witnessed with 844, including examination cheating, inequality in the education system, we have had a whole year of junior school or junior secondary, grade 7 proceeding to grade 8, and everything they're doing is going to count for grade 9. Are we prepared for the transition to an extent that now we're able to assess the capabilities of learners without the summative exam?
I think the Presidential Working Party noted that we have some challenges. The configuration of how these examinations are going to happen, in my view, it provides an opportunity for kids to continually work hard, because they don't have to wait until the very end. So that's a positive thing. And I think that if we can, if we can calibrate the system in such a way that we are actually getting it right with those kind of assessments, I think that is one way of de-emphasizing examinations. And I would like to say that we are going in the right direction in that regard. However, the biggest challenge for CBC is the hurried implementation that happened, and teachers were unprepared, and therefore, even now as we speak, those school-based assessments, if you have a child who is in the CBC classes, you have seen the challenges that we go through. The projects are given such a short time, to the point that when the child comes home, you look at this poor child and you say, let me just do this thing for them. So at the end of the day, it is the parents who do the projects rather than the children. And so we sort of cheat the system because the demands are impossible. And so I feel that we needed time. We needed either time, or we need intensive retooling of teachers, really intensive retooling of teachers. But most importantly, we needed a competency framework against which we are examining these kids. When we talk about competency, essentially what we are saying is every learning is observable, meaning that if you're doing English or if you're doing Kiswahili, we need to be able to see you speak that language at a certain proficiency. We need to be able to see that child express themselves in that language, but also read and write in that language, okay? And so we would have a very clear, competency against, so that when we say this child has exceeded expectation, the expectation is not of the parent or of the teacher, but it is an objective expectation that is there. So we do not, because of the hurried nature in which CBC was implemented, we did not have that competency framework. And I think we did not even engage as a country to agree that, yes, this is the competency framework against which the learners would be examined. And teachers therefore struggle. So the question then becomes, these assessments that are happening, the projects and the school-based assessments, how do we ensure, how do we audit to make sure that they are actually reflecting, the learning of the child? That is where the challenge is.
Right.
And I think that there is need to, one, urgently develop that competency framework and then help the teachers to understand how to use it.
Kennedy, how do we survive this? Because still, we're in the same community, we're in the same society that has all these inequalities, and the CBC implementation has also been quite unequal if you're to look at the resource availability and how teachers are trained and how they're implementing it. How do you overcome this, knowing that continuously there's a bit of formative assessment that you also count for the final outcome?
Thank you. First, I want to say that as a country, we are living a lie. All these assessments are proceeding on account that CBC is being implemented in our primary schools and in our junior schools. There appears to be some form of teaching between PP1 and grade 6, because our primary school teachers, out of experience, they know how to handle CBC. But they are greatly undermined by resources, especially those teaching in village schools. They have not accessed the requisite materials that are necessary for the practical implementation of the curriculum. However, it is a disaster between grade 6 and grade 9. Why is it a disaster? They have no resources, they have no human resource in terms of teachers, and what is going on is not learning. For example, there are several schools who only have 2 teachers trained to teach humanities, history and Kiswahili, and perhaps a language. These are the teachers who are expected to teach general science, to teach mathematics, and other things. When these students will be subjected to evaluation in grade 9, it is going to be a disaster. Because a student in a private school will not compete equally with a student in a public school, which is under-resourced. Students in specific families will not perform well as compared to students from poor families. In a poor family, the parent is not able to get the required materials. But some families, which are few in this republic, are able. So these inequalities will greatly compromise the exam that will be administered in grade 9. And you are discriminating children based on the abilities of their children. We are creating an equal society. And then this transition to the senior secondary schools. Not all schools are the same in this country. People went to Alliance in the 90s and Mangu are not the same as people went to Shamsinjiri in the same years. Alliance was a gateway to some serious career, richness, and good life those days. Today we have equal opportunity. Why are we going to place children who have not been taught in grade 6, grade 7, and grade 8 because they had no teachers? How will they compete to go to the so-called national schools? Though the Presidential Working Committee has said we decategorize schools, but Shakespeare says, what is in a name? That which is at Alliance will remain there, whether you gave it another name or not. So whether you call it national school or village school, Alliance will remain Alliance. So we're going to take people who accessed resources and human resources in form of teachers to those serious schools, and the children of the poor will remain in village and transit to the nearest, poorest secondary school, and then transit to the nearest, poorest family life that they can begin. It is the worst form of inequity that is being meted on the people of Kenya through a system of education that does not favor the poor.
And part of that, which I want us to look at, is that because in 2 years' time, or in 3 years' time, that should be 2026, so just over 2 years' time, the first cohort, which is in grade 7 now, should transition to the first level of senior school, which is grade 10, if I'm not mistaken. So this is what is supposed to happen, that 60% of the class should go to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics institutions, that is STEM. 25% should go to social science schools, and 15% should go to arts and sports science. And eventually, if they proceed to the next level of the university, 60% should be in the science areas. Dr. Jepkemei, so this is a recommendation by the Presidential Working Party, but is it realistic that 60% will actually transition to STEM schools?
Where are those schools? Sam, I think I said when the last time I was here that any education reform is as good as the economy of that country. We have very good documents that describe what we would like to see. In fact, the Presidential Working Party has very good recommendations, but how do we implement them if we don't have the money even for capitation, as my brother was saying earlier? So everything that we are doing will require money, and if we don't have the money, then education as a social good, as an equalizer in Kenya becomes a very different thing, because then it says if you go to a private school, you are good because you get the resources that you need. Why? Because your parents are paying for it. And if you go to a public primary school, then you know it's 50-50 for you. You might get teachers for grade 6, you might not. Now, I really think that we need to think about how to resource the education reform, the reform process itself, even before we think about the system and how it is going to be implemented, because I have not seen the costing for the entire implementation of CBC from its inception in 2017 to today. What is the cost? So when we talk about STEM schools and we talk about the art schools, you know, a music academy, for example, how much would it cost if we were to do a good music academy that would, you know, bring out musicians? We know STEM, engineering, we don't have the resource outlay that is going to support that kind of transition to 60% to STEM and 25% to 15% to arts and the others to social sciences. My worry is this, that we will go back to what 844 was, because if you remember, 844 initially was actually competence-based. If you remember, there was a lot of requirements for for practical learning and all these kinds of things. But by the time we were reviewing that system, it was really struggling under its own weight because of the cost, and so there is a negative correlation between equity and the higher cost of education. That every time the cost of education goes higher, and definitely if we are going to implement this, it will mean that we will need resources. And if government is not able to raise those resources, there will always be this thing of let the parents contribute. And which parents are able to contribute in these difficult economic times? It is only parents who are able already. Right. So those that are not able, those kids will remain. So so it becomes this thing of whoever has more will be added, and the one who has less, even the little they have, will be taken away from them. I think it's important for us to have equity at the very fore of any education reform. And as we are thinking about the good things about STEM and all these kinds of things, let's think, do we have the money? If we don't, let's, if I were to be asked, we would have taken almost 10 years slowly implementing the CBC systematically until we get to the end, because definitely we don't have the resources. And because we are moving very quickly, we are being overtaken by milestones that we are not prepared in terms of resources. And so I worry that we will revise this system, and then we will go back to what we did to 844, remove, many subjects haphazardly because of cost, not because they are not necessary.
And Kennedy, because when you listen to this, then there are children that are already in the system, and it would appear that the system is it wasting their time or their potential? Are there solutions, knowing that, as you said, many schools do not have laboratories? If you're talking about the junior school, which are now domiciled in primary schools, the policy of the government is that to appeal to members of parliament to devote some of the resources from the CDF kitties to construct laboratories. no mention about equipping them. What are we doing in terms of saving this generation?
We require radical changes. And we don't have to experiment with the lives of these children in secondary schools, primary schools, going through their formative stages in life. One of the radical measures that we need to take as a country is to decide whether this junior school, so to speak, is part of primary school or is part of a secondary school. Make that decision. You can still call it senior primary and be in primary, and take the science laboratory-oriented issues to the secondary school when they transit there. Another issue that we need to talk about is this categorization about STEM, about science, social sciences, and so forth. Remember, you're going to send students to their pathways in grade 10. Students who have not been taught in grade 6, 7, and 8.
You mean 7, 8, and 9?
7, 8, and 9. Students who have been taught by a CRE teacher, who have been taught general science by a CRE teacher, you want to assess them and say that now these learners cannot go to a STEM school, without realizing that during their tenure in junior school, they were taught science by a humanity teacher. They were taught mathematics by a teacher of English. We are going to kill the potential of our learners in a very barbaric manner. Why can't we give them time, admit them to senior schools, allow them, expose them to people who are now qualified to teach these subjects, and say in grade 12, they can make a decision? Or these are decisions that can be made in colleges and universities. Why are we allowing a university to offer engineering at the same time sociology? We have very many universities. We can say, let KU, for instance, offer education. Let UON offer medicine. Let MOI offer law. Let KISI offer this, so that universities go with the pathways. It will even improve the quality of the graduates that come out. But we want to do this in secondary schools where we have minimal resources, where we have minimal manpower, and where our children have not been given equal opportunity to explore their potential. Since we cannot run away from CBC, the best we can do is to improve the system. And the first appeal goes to funding. If government is interested in our system of education, it must demonstrate this by way of funding. It can never be that when Parliament apportions money, it apportions and says, these billions have gone to the Ministry of Education to fund free primary and free secondary education. And during the actual funding, government only funds 50%. It does not come to tell Kenyans that the 50% that remained was taken to this, to this, to this, and to this. Where does this money go to? When people of Kenya, through their members of parliament, apportion money to the Ministry of Education, and government funds the tune of 50%, where does the rest of the money go to? Or government should just carry hands and say, we are no longer able to fund free primary and secondary education. Parents, it is up to you. Take your children to school if you can pay. Other than cheating parents that they are funding education, yet they are only taking children for granted by not funding, exposing them to the minimum standards of education, and getting nil or a third, not even half-baked, is a third-baked generation of learners out of the system. This is not very useful. If we don't have funds to implement CBC, let us tell parents, we have no one to support education, it is up to you.
You know, I'm wondering, I mean, we are marking 60 years in December, 60 years of independence. Have we done enough really to get it? Because President Jomo Kenyatta said that he wanted the country to fight three things. Let me say it in Swahili: ujinga, umaskini na ugonjwa. Have we done what he should have done in 60 years about ignorance, fighting ignorance, Daktari?
You know, we still have very low literacy levels in our schools. If you remember the Uwezo report that talked about our children learning, there've been a number of interventions, but we still have some of the lowest levels of literacy. I do think that intention is not sufficient. It is not enough. President Kenyatta the first indicated his intention. But you put out your intentions, you follow with strategies, and you make sure that those strategies are well funded. We started with a system that was already segregated. You had the alliance that he's talking about, and then we had the provincial schools, and then we had the district schools. And we transitioned just that from grammar schools for the whites, and then the other schools for the Asians, and then the others for Africans. And I think the fact that we have carried that for 60 years, to me, is a problem, because our strategy cannot work if a very tiny little percentage of these schools are receiving the right resources, and then the majority are just there, and then we say, oh, but they're called extra county schools now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's an extra county school, or that's a county school. But the children who are there are Kenyan children. So I feel that the intention was good, but the strategies have not matched the intention, and more importantly, the resourcing has not even tried to match that intention. And so there's a big challenge. We are still talking about foundational learning. We are still talking about challenges on foundational learning. And now, globally, we are really focusing a lot of resources into helping children to learn how to read and do math at the very lower levels. And Kenya is part of those countries that will require that kind of aid. At 60 years, we shouldn't be doing that. But what is the problem with us? Of course, we have had moments of corruption. We have had moments also of, as I said, the question of segregation of schools, where you continue funding schools that are already doing okay, and they have more teachers than they need for one reason or another. And then you have schools like in northern Kenya. I visited a school where they had only 2 teachers, the principal and the deputy. So they would put kids 3 classes in one, and then the teacher is telling me she's teaching multi-grade. Grade 1, 2, and 3 together, and then 5, 6, and 7, and then grade 8 were in a separate class. And these are 2 teachers. So the KICD radio lessons would be teaching the extra class that doesn't have a teacher. That level of inequality is what is the problem in this country.
I want us to take a look at the feedback of what Kenyans are saying or asking this evening as we inch closer to the end of the conversation. And of course, you can do that via X at Citizen TV Kenya. And the first one here is, you don't say who you are. I dropped out of school in 1994 and got married to an old man. How can I get back to school to complete my basic education? I am 47 years. Kindly advise as soon as possible. Who has an answer?
We had Mzee, what was his name?
Kimani Maruge.
Kimani Maruge.
He should go back to school. Now, unfortunately, she will have to go to CBC. She can choose where to start based on the level of her understanding. Yeah. She can go to PP1 if she's at 0. Yeah. Like if she has something little to start with, she can start with grade 2, 3. Yeah. And once she copes up, she'll be subjected to grade 6 testing, grade 9 testing, and education has no limit. She will enjoy the same rights like any other child.
But I must say that
you're saying any other child, but this is not a child.
Like any other student or any other pupil.
I think also I want to mention something here that I'm aware that the Ministry of Education is working on accelerated education for people who are not able to go to the formal system of education. So I think that is also something for her to, or him, or her, it's a she, to look out in the coming months. I think once that policy comes out, it will it's going to provide guidelines of how do we do accelerated education. So instead of taking 8 years, she probably will take 3 years based on,
okay. Okay, let's take a look at some more feedback that Kenyans are sharing with us. This is Ohwas Settler Kaburu. And by the way, my children have never been in cheating year. When sitting exams, we don't hear anything about cheating, but the year they are not sitting, we hear this thing of cheating all over. And I almost wondered, why wasn't I that lucky to have them in the cheating year? Okay, well done, Ocheng. He said that Kennedy is right. The system is to blame for the rampant cheating. It is painful because it disadvantages hardworking and honest students, teachers, and principals, and rewards mediocre, dishonest ones. Kevin, you're saying that we should ensure that students are monitored during examination. If one is found cheating, they should be punished seriously and their results are cancelled. And I think it's important here to say that for every cheating, much of the time an adult is involved.
Yes.
So really, as we wind up, Kennedy, what should we look forward to? But also, is there a positive message, at least for the learners?
Yes, there is a positive message, and the positive message is that at least government through the Ministry of Education has assured them that there will be a smooth examination period. They don't expect them to cheat, but the government must walk its talk. The government must immediately and urgently release funds to schools to enable principals purchase chemicals that are involved in the practicals so that learners can sit exam without facing difficulties.
Okay. And Dr. in not so long, we'll probably sit here and analyze the performance of the learners. What should we then look forward to?
I sort of dread to think about what's happening because we are always looking at trends. And in the last 5 years or so, the trend has been basically the same. Majority of the learners have not done well. So I want to be optimistic, but I think I am also a scientist, so I would like to see the trend. So if last year we had more than 50% at D plus and below, if we improve, that would be good, but I don't imagine that it will be an earth-moving improvement. But I don't want to conclude with a negative connotation there. I want to say that, listen, we want to see our country improve, but also it's important to appreciate the things that we have done well. Our education system, by the way, is the strongest in Eastern Central Africa. So it's that, with all the challenges that we are talking about, it's still a strong education system. And if we can fix the areas that we are struggling with, you know, we would do very well to really think about equity, because I think that's our biggest issue. And if we did that, we would be on our way to do well. The other thing that I would like to say is that when children cheat, as you say, there's an adult. I'd really like to see a more value-based approach to this vice, rather than doing it from the law side. If you look at Melly's report, there's a lot of DCI, there's a lot of, you know, all these kinds of things. Obviously, the adults who engage in this should face the law, but I think it is important to make the environment where the children are to be as good and as enjoyable and as less threatening as possible. When you have a police officer standing right there and you're sitting an exam and you're 12 years old, I'm not sure that's a very safe environment. So my thinking is that there are many ways that we can make the examination safe instead of using the same old system and using so much force to make sure that the examinations are you know, that we don't have malpractice in the exams.
Interesting. Obongo Melissa is saying that I am a JSS intern teacher, and let me tell you, this JSS is a sham. Teacher Service commissioners are sitting pretty in Nairobi thinking that this thing is working. Sad. A serial history teacher like me is expected to teach integrated science. Yeah. He says again, yeah. Sad. I was hoping to end the show on a better note. But that's what we have. Kennedy Achesa, thank you so much for making time for us. And Dr. Evelyn Jepkemei, thank you so much for your time. We'll continue to talk about the situation in the education sector, but best of success to those that are prepared for the examination. And all the best. My name is Sam Gituku. See you again some other time. Good night.